Chris stood in front of the mirror in the small dressing room, the dim lamp above his head barely illuminating his face. He stared intently at his reflection, studying every scratch, every old scar that had become his medals over many years in the ring. He recalled the moment when his life changed. He remembered his last fight. That day his eyes, usually cold and decisive, glowed with some strange anxiety. This fight was special. Not because the opponent was stronger or more dangerous, no, he dealt with this throughout his career. Chris just felt at the time that this might be the last time he would step into the ring. His thoughts were interrupted by a quiet knock on the door. He turned and saw his girlfriend Ashley, whom he had recently started dating. She looked beautiful as always. Long blonde hair flowed freely over her shoulders. Large blue eyes looked at him with concern. "Everything is fine?" she asked quietly, coming closer and carefully touching his shoulder. Chris smiled, trying to look confident. "Of course, everything will be fine. You know me." Ashley didn't answer right away, just looked at him carefully. There was love mixed with fear in her eyes. She always worried before battles, but this time her anxiety was different, more palpable. "I know you better than you think," she finally said. "Don't try to seem stronger than you are. I feel like something is bothering you." Chris looked away and slowly sat down on the bench against the wall. She was right. It wasn't just doubts that bothered him. He was haunted by a bad feeling. He was tired of hiding it from her. "I'm not the same as before," he sighed, looking at his tightly clenched fists. "The body doesn't listen, the reflexes are no longer the same. I'm afraid this fight will be my last." Ashley sat down next to him and gently placed her hand on his thigh. "You have always been a fighter," she said quietly but firmly, "and I'm proud of you, no matter how it ends." Chris smiled, this time sincerely. "You are the only one who believed in me even when I didn't believe in myself," he said, gently taking her hand. "Because I know who you really are," she whispered, clinging to him. Their short conversation was interrupted by a sharp knock on the door. "It's time to go out," came the voice of the organizer. Chris took a deep breath, stood up, straightened his boxing gloves, and looked at his wife one last time. "I will return as a winner," he promised. She nodded, trying to hide her excitement behind a smile. Chris walked towards the ring along a long, poorly lit corridor. The roar of the crowd grew louder with every step. His heart beat faster and faster, adrenaline filled his body, drowning out fears and doubts. Entering the arena, he saw camera flashes and heard the screams of fans. This moment was always special. It felt alive, real. The battle started abruptly and harshly. His opponent was young, fast, and ambitious. Chris found it difficult to keep up with his movements. He could feel old injuries making themselves known with every missed blow. But he did not give up. His will was stronger than the pain. By mid-fight, the crowd was on their feet, screaming and cheering for both fighters. Chris was breathing heavily, his body ached, but his spirit remained strong. He remembered Ashley's words, and it gave him strength. Another round, another blow, blood on the lips. He felt almost nothing anymore. He moved automatically, instinctively reacting to his opponent's blows. In the 10th round, Chris saw an opening and put all his remaining strength into a powerful blow. The fist hit the target, and the opponent collapsed to the floor of the ring. The crowd erupted in cheers, and the referee began the countdown. When the bell sounded to end the fight, Chris could barely stand from fatigue, but he won. The judge raised his hand, the audience roared with delight. But immediately after the victory, Chris felt a strange weakness. Pain shot through his head like lightning. He barely had time to reach the corner of the ring and lean on the ropes. The doctors surrounded him almost instantly. What happened next seemed to be in a fog. A hospital, bright lights, doctors saying something unintelligible. Only a few hours later, he clearly heard the phrase that he had been afraid to hear all his life. "Chris, unfortunately, you have serious brain damage. You will no longer be able to perform. It's too dangerous for your life." Chris's world collapsed in an instant. He looked at the ceiling, unable to believe what he heard. His career ended right now, this minute. His whole life, the meaning he had built over the years, disappeared. All that was left was emptiness. The following days turned into an endless string of gray, joyless moments. He almost never got out of bed, refused to eat or talk. Ashley was nearby, but her words and concern seemed to fly past him. He lost himself, his dream, his purpose. For the first time in his entire life, he felt weak, lost, and useless. Chris knew he had to fight, but he had no more strength left. A dark depression weighed on his mind, and he didn't know if he had the will to get back on his feet. He lay in the dark, listening to Ashley's quiet breathing, and felt the darkness growing inside him, which seemed to never be overcome. After difficult months of depression, complete hopelessness, and doubt, Chris realized that he could no longer live in this state. One morning, he woke up with a long-forgotten determination inside him. He sat on the bed, looked at the sun's rays penetrating through the curtains, and suddenly clearly realized that all was not lost. "I can't allow myself to die in my own pity," he said to himself out loud, trying to convince himself that he really believed these words. Ashley noticed changes almost immediately. She walked over and gently put her arm around his shoulders. "Did something happen?" she asked quietly, afraid to upset the delicate balance of his mood. Chris turned to her and smiled, sincerely and warmly for the first time in a long time. "I decided that I would not give up," he said firmly. "I won't be able to fight in the ring on my own anymore, but I know I can help others become champions." Ashley, hearing this, beamed with happiness. She had long dreamed of seeing that strong man with whom she fell in love many years ago. Thus began a new chapter in their lives. Chris invested all his savings into opening his own gym. He didn't just want a fitness center, he needed a real boxing club where young guys could find themselves, throw out energy, and build a career. The first weeks were difficult. We had to deal with repairs, purchase equipment, negotiate rent, and draw up documents. Chris worked from morning until late at night, and although fatigue sometimes overwhelmed his body, his soul began to revive again. Ashley was on hand, helping with everything from choosing the interior to doing the bookkeeping. When the gym finally opened its doors, Chris stood in the middle of the room and felt pride filling his chest. He saw before himself a new meaning in life to help others achieve what he could no longer achieve himself. Little by little, young guys began to come to him, timidly at first, then more and more confidently. Among them were beginners and those who had already tried themselves in boxing but had lost faith in their abilities. Chris felt reflected in them when he himself began his career, full of doubts but burning with a desire to win. He trained them with special passion. His methods were tough but effective. He made everyone feel that in boxing, not only physical strength and technique are important, but also fortitude, self-confidence, and the desire to go to the end, no matter what. Among Chris's students, a young guy named Jake especially stood out. Tall, strong, with incredible reaction speed and a natural ability to sense an opponent. But Jake lacked discipline, often got emotional, and could easily lose control. Chris saw both potential and threat in this. "You have everything to become a champion," Chris told Jake after another training session. "But if you don't learn to control yourself, it will ruin you." Jake listened attentively, although there was a challenge in his eyes. "I can handle it, coach," he answered confidently. "You will see." Over time, Jake became a special project for Chris. He spent more time with him than with others, investing his knowledge and experience into him. Chris dreamed that Jake could rise higher than he could. Within a few months of opening, the gym was already bustling with life and movement. Local residents began to recognize Chris as not just a former boxer, but as a coach who could not only teach technique, but also inspire, make you believe in the impossible. But despite his success, there was still doubt lurking inside Chris. He was afraid that he might not live up to the expectations of his students, especially Jake, on whom he was betting more and more. One day after training, left alone in an empty gym, he thoughtfully looked at the boxing bag, realizing that now his ring was not just 4 ropes, but the life of each of those who trusted him. "I won't let them down," he said quietly to himself. Never again. That evening, returning home, Chris felt that he was living life to the fullest again, that he had acquired a new meaning. and now nothing could break him again. Chris's gym began to flourish faster than he expected. Every day brought new students, each of whom dreamed of finding in this place not only body strength, but also self-confidence. But along with the growth of popularity came new difficulties. Chris understood that it was becoming increasingly difficult to cope with the increased workload alone. He barely had time to pay due attention to each student, and this worried him very much. One evening, after a hard training day, when most of the guys had already gone home, and Chris tiredly sat down on a bench by the window, a young guy entered the hall. He stopped in the doorway and looked around the room with the assessing gaze of a professional. It was clear that he was well versed in boxing. From his posture to the way he held his shoulders, everything spoke of his involvement in this sport. "How can I help?" Chris asked, watching the stranger. The guy came closer and extended his hand. "My name is Tom," he introduced himself. "I recently moved to the city and am looking for a coaching job. Your hall seems to me an interesting place." Chris shook his hand, noting the firmness and confidence of his grip. "Chris, the owner of this place, have you boxed professionally?" "A little," Tom smiled modestly. "There were injuries, so I had to leave the ring, but I can train well." Chris motioned for him to sit next to him. "Tell me about your experience," he suggested, already sensing that this guy had potential. Tom began to tell his story. He was an amateur boxer with a good winning record, but was forced to retire after a shoulder injury. Instead of giving up, Tom devoted himself to studying coaching. He took several courses, received certifications, and most importantly, worked with several renowned trainers on the East Coast. Chris listened to him carefully, asked questions, clarified details. Every new detail convinced him that Tom could be exactly the person he had been looking for so long. "Why did you choose this city?" Chris asked when Tom finished talking about his past. Tom shrugged his shoulders, smiling a little sadly. "I just wanted a change. Sometimes you need to drop everything and start from scratch. I think you understand this." Chris smiled, understanding those words better than anyone else. He was ready to give this young man a chance. "Okay, let's try," he said after a pause. "Come tomorrow morning, we'll see how you work with the guys." Tom nodded, his eyes lighting up with joy and anticipation. The next morning, Tom showed up at the gym exactly at 7 o'clock, an hour before the first workout. He immediately began helping Chris prepare the gym for classes, laid out the equipment, and checked the condition of the punching bags and punching bags. When the first students arrived, Chris watched with interest as Tom quickly found a common language with them. He not only confidently explained the technique and demonstrated the exercises, but also found an individual approach to everyone, even the most difficult guys like Jake. By the end of the day, Chris was finally convinced that he had made the right choice. He approached Tom, who was cleaning up equipment after class. "The guys seem to like you," Chris noted with a slight smile. Tom looked up and smiled back. "I'm glad to hear that. I feel comfortable here and you guys are great. Lots of talent, especially in a guy named Jake. He is special. He needs a strict but fair approach." Chris nodded, appreciating Tom's observation skills. "That's right. Jake is my best student, but sometimes he can be too hot and impatient. I think we can handle it together," Tom said confidently, looking straight into Chris's eyes. The gym, which began as a small dream of a former boxer, gradually turned into a real place of strength and motivation for dozens of young people, and this was largely the merit of Tom, who, together with Chris, walked towards a common goal to educate future champions and give them the chance that they themselves were once deprived of by fate. Chris, watching Tom work, increasingly felt that he had made the right choice, and for the first time in a long time, he began to look into the future with confidence and hope. It was a sunny afternoon, and Ashley decided to give her husband a pleasant surprise. She knew that Chris sometimes forgot to eat, completely immersed in training. Today, she prepared his favorite roast beef sandwiches, a fresh salad, and homemade lemonade, all in a neat basket. As she approached the gym, Ashley paused for a moment at the door to straighten her hair and take a deep breath. Every time she came here, she felt especially proud of her husband, and how much he had changed, regaining the meaning of life after his injury. When she entered the gym, training was in full swing. Young boxers practiced punches on bags, some jumped rope, and others spared in the ring. The smell of hard work was in the air, the smell of sweat, leather, and patience. Ashley smiled as she spotted Chris in the far corner, giving advice to one of his students. Chris turned and noticed her. His serious face instantly softened, his eyes lit up with a warm smile. He walked towards her, extending his arms for a hug. "What are you doing here, dear?" he asked, hugging her tenderly and kissing her on the cheek. "I decided to check what my husband ate today," Ashley replied playfully, showing him the basket. "You know me better than anyone," Chris replied with a smile, feeling his stomach growl treacherously. Ashley laughed. "I knew you forgot about food again." They walked over to a small bench against the wall where Chris usually rested between workouts. Ashley laid out the lunch she had brought on the table while her husband sat down next to her. At that moment, Tom walked towards them, noticing the stranger next to Chris. He stopped a couple of steps away, a little shy. "Oh, Tom," Chris called out to him, inviting him to come over. "Meet my wife, Ashley." Tom came closer and extended his hand in a friendly manner. "It's a pleasure, Ashley. I've heard a lot about you from Chris." Ashley smiled and shook hands, noting to herself how confident he was and how sincerely he smiled. Something about him immediately aroused her trust. "Nice to meet you, Tom. Chris also talked a lot about you. Thanks for helping him here." Tom blushed slightly, lowering his eyes in embarrassment. "I like working here. Chris is a great mentor." Chris nodded approvingly, encouraging him. "Tom, join us. Ashley prepared a lot of food. There will definitely be enough for you." "Yes, please," Ashley said, inviting him with a gesture. "I'd be glad to hear more about you." Tom sat down opposite the couple, carefully taking the sandwich, and they began to talk. During the conversation, Ashley learned that Tom had moved from a small town where he previously lived with his parents and younger sister. He said how hard it was to leave his professional boxing career and start over, but working with Chris helped him find new meaning. "I was lucky to have met your husband," Tom said warmly, looking at Chris. "I don't know where I would have ended up without his help." Ashley looked tenderly at her husband, feeling her pride in him grow even more. "Chris always believed in people even when they didn't believe in themselves," she said, placing her hand on her husband's shoulder. Chris smiled modestly, not used to hearing such praise addressed to him. "I'm just doing what I believe in," he said, looking at Tom. "And I was lucky that you were there right when I needed you." Tom smiled shyly, clearly not used to praise. His gaze lingered on Ashley for a moment, noting how beautiful and confident she was. He quickly looked away, afraid that someone would notice his gaze. After lunch, Tom thanked him for the delicious food and returned to training, leaving Ashley alone with her husband. "I liked your assistant," she said, watching how he confidently interacted with the students. "He seems like a good guy." "Yes," Chris answered thoughtfully. "He's special. I think together we can achieve great success." Ashley smiled and kissed his cheek. "I don't even doubt it." She left the hall, feeling light and happy about how much their life had changed. Ashley knew that Chris was now in good hands and that many good things were ahead of them. Chris, left alone, looked for a long time at the door through which his wife had just left, grateful to fate for the fact that in the most difficult moments of his life, the very people who were needed most were always next to him. Chris clearly remembered that evening as if it were yesterday. He walked into his usual bar after another tough workout, tired and exhausted, with bruises on his face and heavy thoughts in his head. The establishment had a cozy, almost homely atmosphere. Dim lighting, a wooden bar counter, and soft music playing in the background. He sat down at the bar and looked up to order a whiskey. It was then that he first saw her Ashley. She smiled while talking to another visitor, and her smile was so sincere and bright that for a moment Chris forgot why he came. Long blonde hair fell over her shoulders, her eyes sparkled with warmth, and her every gesture seemed mesmerizing to him. When Ashley turned to him, her eyes met his, and something inside Chris changed forever. "What will you drink?" she asked, smiling. "Whiskey with ice, please," Chris replied, unable to take his eyes off her. "Hard day?" she asked sympathetically, placing the glass in front of him. "No more than usual," he answered with a slight grin. Ashley smiled softly and extended her hand. "Ashley, I've been working here recently." "Chris," he introduced himself, feeling the warmth of her palm. "Nice to meet you." Since then, Chris has become a frequent visitor to the bar. At first, he convinced himself that he simply liked this place, but he soon admitted to himself that he only came here for Ashley. Every evening, he found a reason to talk to her a little longer, learning more about her. She dreamed of opening her own small restaurant, loved traveling, and always carried on a conversation with incredible ease and humor. Their relationship developed rapidly. Soon they began to spend time outside of work. Long walks around the city, nightly conversations about everything and nothing, quiet dinners in cozy cafes. Ashley quickly became not just a girlfriend for him, but a close friend, the person he trusted more than anyone in the world. Chris soon realized that he was truly in love. He could not imagine a day without her smile, without the sound of her voice, without the warmth that she radiated. One night, as they sat on the roof of his house, looking at the stars, he confessed his love to her for the first time. "You have become everything to me," he said quietly, taking her hand in his. "I didn't even notice how I stopped imagining my life without you." Ashley smiled, her eyes shining with happiness. "I love you, Chris, and I will always be there for you, no matter what." Their romance became incredibly passionate and deep. Every minute spent together was filled with vivid emotions and unbridled passion. Their relationship was stormy, sometimes even tense, but always filled with tenderness and mutual understanding. When Chris's career was suddenly cut short due to a serious injury, he fell into a deep depression. The whole world collapsed in front of him, but it was Ashley who did not allow him to fall completely. She supported him, not allowing him to withdraw into himself, and convinced him every day that life did not end there. It was her voice that became the only thing he heard in his head during the darkest days. One night, when Chris lay awake, staring at the ceiling and agonizing over how to move forward with his life, Ashley said quietly, "You are stronger than you think. You can find yourself again. I believe in you." It was her faith that gradually brought him out of darkness. Every day he began to feel the strength to live on, make plans, move forward, because she was nearby. A few months after the injury, as Chris began to recover, he decided to take the most important step of his life. One evening, having invited Ashley for a walk along the embankment, he stopped at the very edge, where the river quietly whispered its secrets under the starry sky, and suddenly dropped to one knee. "Ashley," he said in a trembling voice, taking a small box with a ring from his pocket, "you saved me when I had almost lost hope. You are the best thing that happened in my life. Marry me." Ashley, overwhelmed and happy, couldn't hold back her tears. She nodded, almost unable to speak from overwhelming emotions. "Yes, of course, I will marry you." Their wedding was simple, but very sincere and filled with love. Close friends and family gathered to share the big day. Chris felt that his life now had new meaning. Ashley became his support, his inspiration, the person who made him believe in himself again. Every day he felt stronger next to her. Ashley became not just a wife, but his personal salvation, support, and meaning of life, which he seemed to have lost forever. Now he knew for sure that no matter what happened, as long as Ashley was around, he could withstand everything. Chris often recalled the early years of his marriage to Ashley with special warmth and tenderness. It was a time when everything seemed simple and clear, filled with love and mutual understanding. After the wedding, they rented a small cozy house near the gym, and their life seemed almost ideal. Every day brought them new joy from being together, supporting each other in everything. Ashley quickly became an integral part of his life, both at home and in the gym. Despite the fact that she had little experience in boxing, her organizational skills and warm attitude towards people quickly made her an indispensable assistant to Chris. She took on many administrative responsibilities, planning class schedules, managing finances, and communicating with clients, creating an atmosphere of warmth and comfort in the hall. Every morning began equally wonderful. They got up together, made breakfast, and, laughing and chatting about everything in the world, headed to work. In those days, it seemed that they were not just husband and wife, but also best friends, partners, people who understood each other perfectly. Ashley was always there, supporting Chris in all his endeavors and dreams. Her support was especially important in those days, when Chris was overcome by doubts about his new role as a coach. Ashley always knew how to find the right words, calm him down, and restore his faith in his own strength. One day, after a particularly difficult day at the gym, in which one of his students suffered a heavy defeat in a competition, Chris returned home completely depressed. He was sitting on the couch, silently looking at the floor, when Ashley sat down next to him and took his hand. "You're too hard on yourself, my love," she said softly, clinging to him. "You are doing an incredible job helping these guys. Victory is not always the only success. You give them a chance to believe in themselves. That's much more important." Her words always went straight to the heart, calming and giving strength. It was thanks to her support that he again and again found the strength to move on, become better, learn, and improve. In their free time, they tried to spend every free minute together. They often went for walks in the park, had small picnics on weekends, and went to nature, where they could enjoy peace and quiet, far from the noisy city. In the evenings, they watched movies, lying on the couch and enjoying the peace and comfort that they created together. Ashley was not just a wife, she became Chris's main advisor, inspiration, and support. Thanks to her, he learned not only to overcome difficulties, but also to enjoy every moment of life. Every time he looked at her, his heart filled with gratitude that she chose him. Every year their love only grew deeper. Despite the minor quarrels and misunderstandings that happen to any couple, they quickly made up, realizing that the most important thing was to preserve the warmth and respect that united them from the very beginning. Chris truly believed that their marriage was almost perfect. He couldn't imagine that life could have turned out differently if Ashley hadn't been there. She was his rock and his reason, the person with whom he could share his deepest thoughts and fears. Sometimes, late in the evening, when Ashley was already sleeping next to her, Chris looked at her and thanked fate for the fact that she became his life partner. He remembered the first time he met her in a bar and thought about how incredible their path to happiness had been. She was there in his most difficult moments, supported him in times of despair, never letting him give up. Over the years, their relationship not only retained passion and tenderness, but also acquired a depth that many would envy. They understood each other without words, read the mood by their eyes and body movements, knew when to simply remain silent, and when it is better to support with a word. Chris thought that they had gone through everything that a spouse could go through: joy and sadness, success and disappointment, the bitterness of losses, and the delight of new victories. But at the same time, he did not suspect that many more tests awaited him ahead, which would test their marriage for strength as never before. During these early years of their marriage, Chris was absolutely sure that nothing could ruin their happiness. He trusted Ashley unconditionally and was ready to give everything in the world for her, not knowing how much their lives would change in the future. But then, in those golden years filled with love, he was simply happy, and nothing could make him doubt the sincerity of his wife's feelings. Chris returned home late in the evening, feeling pleasantly tired after a long day of training. Ashley met him at the door, dressed in the soft, cozy sweater he loved to see her on, with her hair down and a smile that could warm you up even after the hardest day. "Hi, honey," she hugged him and kissed him on the cheek. "How was the rest of the day?" "Wonderful," Chris replied, taking off his jacket and taking off his shoes. "After your visit, the guys trained with redoubled zeal. Apparently, the lunch you brought inspired everyone." Ashley laughed as she headed into the kitchen where a hot meal was ready. She knew very well that Chris always came home hungry. "I'm glad I could support you and the guys a little," she said, placing the plate on the table in front of him. "By the way, Tom seems like a very nice guy. You made the right choice by hiring him." Chris nodded, starting dinner and noting with pleasure that today she had prepared his favorite steak and mashed potatoes. "Yes, Tom is a really great guy," he replied, enjoying the taste of the food. "He settled in quickly and seems to get along well with all the students." Ashley sat down opposite him, resting her chin on her hand and smiling thoughtfully. "You know, he seems like a very reliable person," she continued. "It seems to me that he sincerely wants to help you with the gym. It's obvious that he likes what he does." Chris looked at his wife and smiled. "You're right. I didn't even expect that he would get into the swing of things so quickly. Usually, newcomers take a long time to get used to it, but Tom seemed to immediately feel what to do and how to communicate with people." "Yes," Ashley thought for a moment. "He is also very attentive. Today, when we talked, he asked about how long we have been together, how you opened the gym. It was clear that he was really interested in getting to know you better." Chris nodded thoughtfully, putting down his fork and looking carefully at his wife. "You know, this is a good idea," he said suddenly. Ashley raised her eyebrows questioningly. "Which one exactly?" "Why don't we invite him to dinner tomorrow?" Chris suggested, smiling. "This will help us get to know each other better outside the gym and create a more friendly atmosphere. Plus, you're a great cook, and I'm sure he'll love it." Ashley thought for a moment, then smiled happily. "That's a great idea, Chris. I'd love to cook something special. I think Tom will be happy too." Chris felt pleasantly relieved that his wife liked the idea. He really wanted to get to know Tom better, to establish a trusting relationship with him, so that their work together would be as comfortable and productive as possible. The next day, Ashley began preparing for dinner in the morning. She went to the market to buy fresh food, carefully choosing ingredients for the dishes she decided to cook. In the evening, the house was already filled with the aromas of baked meat, fresh vegetables, and homemade pie. When the doorbell rang, Chris opened it and saw Tom standing with a bouquet of flowers in his hands, a little embarrassed and clearly unsure of how formally he should behave in such a situation. "Hi, Tom," Chris smiled, shaking his hand and inviting him inside. "Glad you could come." "Thanks for the invitation," Tom replied, blushing slightly. "I really appreciate that you invited me to visit." Ashley emerged from the kitchen, smiling and holding out her hand for the flowers. "What beautiful flowers." "Thank you, Tom. That's very nice of you." "I'm glad you liked it," Tom smiled back, relaxing from her warm attitude. During dinner, the conversation was easy and relaxed. Ashley and Chris told Tom about how they met, how they opened the gym, overcoming difficulties and fears. Tom listened carefully, periodically asking questions, showing genuine interest in their story. "You are a wonderful couple," he said sincerely, looking at them both. "It's obvious how much you have done for each other. I think this is very rare these days." Ashley and Chris exchanged warm glances. "Thank you, Tom," Ashley said softly, "but it really wasn't an easy path. The main thing is not to be afraid to trust and support each other." After dinner, they moved to the living room, continuing to talk in a more relaxed atmosphere. Tom talked about his plans and dreams, and Chris realized for the first time how much this guy was like himself in his youth, just as ambitious, full of energy, and the desire to achieve something significant in life. When Tom left, thanking him again for the evening, Ashley and Chris were left alone. She hugged him, burying her face in her husband's chest. "I'm glad we invited him," she said quietly. "He's really a very good guy." "Yes," Chris agreed, hugging her tighter. "I was really lucky to find such an assistant." With each day that passed, Chris began to notice small changes in Ashley's behavior. At first, this seemed insignificant and even pleasant to him. His wife came to work with him more often, took an interest in training, actively participated in conversations, and even began to take part in organizing gym events. He really enjoyed it at first and was glad that Ashley was part of his work world even more than before. However, gradually Chris began to notice that her attention was increasingly focused on Tom. She often wondered how things were going with him, asked about his past, plans, and ambitions. Every time Tom appeared in the gym, Ashley seemed to transform. Her eyes began to sparkle a little brighter, her voice sounded softer and warmer, and she laughed more willingly at his jokes. At first, Chris took it as simple friendliness, because Tom was a really nice guy and a pleasure to talk to. But he soon began to notice that Ashley was increasingly offering to invite Tom to their home for dinner. At first, these were rare evenings when, after a working day, it was nice to spend time with the three of us over dinner, talking and joking. But gradually, these invitations became almost daily. At times, Chris felt slightly irritated, but chalked it up to being tired and overworked. One evening, after Tom left, Chris decided to talk to Ashley about why she invites him over so often. "Darling, I'm glad that you and Tom get along well, but maybe you shouldn't invite him so often," he asked carefully, trying not to hurt her feelings. Ashley looked surprised and slightly puzzled. "Why? He is your friend and assistant. Is it bad that we are friends with him?" "Of course not," Chris quickly assured her, feeling awkward about bringing up the topic. "I just sometimes want to spend time just with you, without anyone else." She smiled, although something flashed in her eyes that he had not noticed before, slight irritation or annoyance. "Okay, if it's so important to you," she answered calmly, but her voice sounded a little colder than usual. Since then, Chris began to notice that Ashley had become different not only in her behavior with Tom, but also in her relationship with him. She gradually pulled away, showed tenderness less often, and stopped initiating intimacy first. She became colder in bed, her kisses became less passionate, and her hugs became more formal. Chris tried not to notice this, convincing himself that this was just a temporary period, perhaps associated with fatigue or some personal experiences. However, inner restlessness did not leave him. Every time he caught her looking at Tom, Chris's chest began to clench unpleasantly. He noticed how Ashley sometimes straightened her hair when talking to Tom, how she blushed slightly when he complimented her. It seemed like a small thing, but it worried him more and more. One night, lying in bed, Chris could not fall asleep for a long time, looking at the ceiling and thinking about what was happening to his wife. In the end, he couldn't stand it and decided to ask directly, "Ashley, tell me honestly, is something going on? You've changed lately, and I don't understand why." She was silent for a long time, and it seemed to him that the silence was becoming unbearable. Finally, she turned to him and seemed about to say something, but changed her mind, turning back. "Nothing special, Chris," she answered quietly. "I just have a lot on my mind. You're putting too much pressure on yourself." Her answer did not convince him, but he did not insist, fearing that it would only worsen the situation. From that moment on, he began to watch her even more carefully, looking for signs that his concern was in vain. But the more he watched, the clearer it became to him that Ashley was indeed moving away. She began to avoid deep conversations with him, began to stay late after work more often, citing matters at the gym, although Chris knew for sure that there was nothing so urgent there. When he came into her office, she quickly minimized the chat window on her computer or put her phone away, which looked suspicious. Deep down, Chris felt that something was wrong, but stubbornly refused to believe the worst. He loved Ashley and believed in their marriage, which seemed unbreakable to him. He convinced himself that this was just a temporary problem that they would definitely get over. But despite his confidence, a feeling of anxiety settled in his heart and did not let go for a moment. He began to ask questions to which he was afraid to hear the answers, and although he didn't want to admit it out loud, the fear of losing her grew stronger. It all started completely innocently, almost by accident. In the first days after Tom arrived at the gym, Ashley treated him like any other employee who needed help settling into a new place. Chris was constantly busy with students, organizing training and solving current issues, so Ashley took it upon herself to ensure that Tom felt comfortable and quickly adapted. At first, their conversations were completely ordinary and short. She explained to him the work procedure, showed him where the documents were kept, and talked about the schedule and characteristics of each student. But gradually Tom began to linger in her office a little longer. Their conversations became more and more personal and open. He knew how to listen like no one else, and Ashley, imperceptibly for herself, began to tell him not only about work, but also about her life, dreams, even small household concerns that she usually did not discuss with anyone except Chris. Tom had a special charm that was difficult to explain in words. He was able to deliver compliments so naturally that Ashley didn't feel they were intentional or intrusive. He could notice a new hairstyle, dress, or even slightly changed makeup, doing it completely unobtrusively, with such ease and warmth that she began to involuntarily smile, feeling a pleasant warmth inside. Gradually, their daily meetings in the office turned into a tradition. While Chris was busy training, Tom came to Ashley's office under the pretext of discussing work issues, but gradually their conversations went far beyond sports and work. He told her about his past, about failures and losses, and Ashley, without noticing it, more and more often found in his words a reflection of her own experiences and fears. One evening, when Chris was forced to stay in the gym for an important training session before the competition, Ashley and Tom were left alone in her office. It was already dark outside, and the soft light of the lamp created an almost intimate atmosphere. They sat opposite each other at a small table, finishing their coffee, and the conversation smoothly turned to personal topics. "Are you happy, Ashley?" Tom suddenly asked, looking carefully into her eyes. The question took her by surprise. She froze for a moment, feeling her heart beat faster. "Of course," she answered hesitantly, trying not to show her excitement. "I have a husband, a favorite job. What else do you need?" Tom smiled slightly, not taking his eyes off her. "Sometimes it feels like you're missing something. Maybe attention or something more." Ashley felt her cheeks turn red and looked away. "I don't know," she answered quietly. "Sometimes it seems that Chris and I have become distant from each other. He's always busy and so am I. But this is normal, it happens to everyone." "You deserve better, Ashley," Tom said softly, placing his hand on her hand, which was lying on the table. His touch was warm and unexpectedly exciting. "I see how much you do for him, for all of us here. But who cares about you?" These words sounded so sincere and caring that Ashley suddenly felt a lump in her throat. She could not answer, only silently looked at their intertwined fingers, feeling her breathing quicken. Since then, Ashley began to see Tom differently. He was no longer just a friend or helper to his husband. He became a man whose attention excited her and made her heart beat faster. She knew it was wrong, that she had to stop, but she couldn't resist his pull. Gradually, their communication became more and more emotional and frank. Tom became the first person in many years who saw her as not just Chris's wife, not just an assistant, but a woman who wanted to feel special and wanted. His words made her feel young, beautiful, and attractive again, and this feeling gradually pulled her deeper. She began to wait for him to show up at the gym, worry when he was late, and feel almost physical pain when he was not around. Her feelings were so strong that sometimes she even avoided Chris, afraid that he would notice a change in her behavior. Ashley did not yet fully realize how far her affection for Tom went. She convinced herself that nothing serious was happening, that this was just a temporary hobby that would soon pass. But deep inside, she already knew that everything was out of her control, and it was becoming increasingly difficult for her to resist. Every glance of Tom, every random, barely perceptible gesture, every word of his became important and valuable to her. And despite the internal struggle, Ashley felt that she was approaching the line, having crossed which she would never be able to return back. She desperately wanted to resist, to save her marriage to Chris and remain a faithful wife. But deep down she knew that her feelings for Tom were already too strong to ignore. She found herself drawn into a dangerous game from which she could no longer escape without losses. The evening was cool and quiet, the streets were already empty, and only rare street lights illuminated Chris's path to the gym. He returned there late in the evening, remembering that he had forgotten important documents that he needed at a morning meeting with his partners. Approaching the hall, he was surprised to notice the light burning in the windows. "That's strange," he thought. "I turned off all the lights before leaving." Chris approached the door and stopped when he noticed that the lock was open. His heart beat faster, an unpleasant feeling came over him. Carefully opening the door, he entered the room, trying to move as quietly as possible, as if afraid to break some strange and frightening silence. He heard quiet laughter and voices coming from the hall, and felt a chill run through his body. Chris walked on, barely breathing, afraid to even think about what he might find. He walked to the gym door and looked inside. At that moment, the whole world seemed to freeze before his eyes, as if reality had ceased to exist. In the ring, right under the spotlight, stood Ashley and Tom. They were in each other's arms, kissing so passionately and greedily that Chris lost his breath. For a moment he thought that this was just a bad dream, and now he would wake up at home next to his wife, and everything would turn out to be a nightmare. But after blinking several times, he realized that all this was reality, cruel and inexorable. Tom and Ashley stood in the ring, completely engrossed in each other. He saw how to passionately kissed her neck, how his hands greedily roamed over her body, taking off her clothes. Ashley didn't resist. On the contrary, she pressed herself against him, passionately kissing and hugging him, as if her life depended on this moment. Chris couldn't move, couldn't speak, couldn't even breathe. His heart seemed to break into 1,000 pieces. Every cell of his body burned with pain and humiliation. He saw his wife, the woman he loved more than life itself, in the arms of another man, his friend and assistant, the person he trusted like no one else. Anger, pain, and despair simultaneously overwhelmed his consciousness. He felt how everything was crumbling inside, how the last remnants of faith and trust were dissolving right before his eyes. But at the same time, he could not look away, as if his mind wanted to capture this moment forever, so that he would never again believe in the illusion of happiness. Ashley and Tom were so into each other that they didn't even notice his presence. They were not afraid of anything, enjoying their closeness right in the very ring that meant so much to Chris. This place was sacred, a symbol of his rebirth after a serious injury, a symbol of the hope that he had been looking for so long and found here. He felt anger and despair that slowly turned into cold, all-consuming hatred. Hatred for the Tom he trusted most after Ashley, and for Ashley herself, who was the center of his universe, the woman he lived and breathed for. Chris, barely holding his breath, stood in the darkness outside the gym door. His heart beat loudly and clearly, as if measuring the last seconds of his former life. Finally, slowly and decisively, he turned and walked towards the front door. Every step was difficult for him. His legs felt like they were filled with lead, but he didn't stop. Approaching the door, he quietly and carefully turned the key in the lock. The click sounded almost deafening in the silence of the empty room. Then, also slowly and calmly, he approached the electricity panel. Opening it, he looked at the rows of switches and, without hesitation, turned off the main switch. The lights in the entire building immediately went out, plunging the gym into complete darkness and silence. Meanwhile, in the hall, Tom and Ashley abruptly interrupted their hot kiss. Tom pulled away sharply, peering warily into the darkness. "What was that?" Ashley asked worriedly, wrapping her arms around herself as if protecting herself from an invisible threat. "It looks like the lights have been turned off," Tom answered, listening intently to the silence. "There might be a power failure." Ashley looked at him with worried eyes. "But this has never happened before. And why were the doors open?" Tom walked to the edge of the ring, trying to discern something in the thick darkness. "I'll go check the shield," he said with feigned calm, although his voice trembled slightly. Ashley followed him carefully, staying close and looking around nervously. In the darkness, the familiar outline of the gym seemed alien and frightening to her. Approaching the front door, Tom tried to open it, but it did not budge. He pulled harder, but the lock was securely closed. "Damn, the door is closed," he said sharply, starting to get nervous. Ashley felt her heart beat faster, and fear began to rise in her throat. "How is this possible? You said you checked the door when we walked in." "Yes, it was open," he answered confused, trying to pull the handle again, but the door did not budge. "Someone locked us outside." They fell silent, listening to the silence. Ashley felt a sense of panic and involuntarily squeezed Tom's hand. "Do you think anyone knows we're here?" she whispered. Tom thought for a moment, but then shook his head, trying to look confident. Perhaps it's just a coincidence. Maybe the security noticed the light and decided to close the doors without checking the premises. We need to call Chris. Ashley turned away sharply, feeling panic overtake her. She couldn't even imagine that Chris would find out the truth this way. Meanwhile, Chris, who was outside the building, slowly and calmly locked the door with the key, putting it back in his pocket. He knew that sooner or later he would have to face Ashley and Tom, but now he wanted them to feel at least a small part of the fear and despair that he himself felt. Now this place has become an arena of betrayal and pain. He felt the rage inside him begin to flare up slowly and inexorably, displacing the pain and shock that he had experienced a few minutes ago. He took a deep breath, trying to calm himself, but his heart was beating fast and erratically. He knew that he couldn't just leave without finding out everything completely. He had to go in there again, right now, and look into the eyes of those who had caused him so much pain. He carefully opened the door and stepped inside, walking quietly down the hallway until he heard the muffled voices of Ashley and Tom. They discussed how to get out of this situation, and although they spoke quietly, he clearly distinguished every word, every intonation. As he got closer, he heard Ashley's voice, full of anxiety. "What should we do now, Tom? If someone saw us?" "Calm down," Tom interrupted her, although there was tension in his voice. "Now I'll think of something. The main thing is that Chris doesn't find out anything." These words completely deprived Chris of the last vestige of self-control. He suddenly turned on the lights in the hall, taking them both by surprise. Tom and Ashley turned to him in horror, frozen for a moment in a daze. "It's too late," Chris said in a cold and calm voice, although a real storm was raging inside. "I already know everything." Ashley, turning pale, began to mutter something incomprehensible, trying to justify herself, but Chris did not listen to her. His gaze was fixed on Tom, who stood defiantly, not even trying to hide his guilt. "Chris, it's not what you think," Tom began, stepping forward, trying to maintain his composure. But Chris wasn't listening anymore. The rage that he had been holding back for too long boiled up inside him. He stepped forward and delivered a powerful blow to Tom's face. He fell into the ring, blood flowing from his broken lip. "You were my friend," Chris said, standing over him. "I trusted you more than anyone." Tom stood up, wiping the blood and breathing heavily, looking at Chris with challenge. "She wanted it herself, Chris. You're too busy with yourself and your career to notice how unhappy she is." Chris felt a new wave of rage wash over him. He threw another punch, then another, ignoring the pain in his own fists, feeling only satisfaction that Tom was now experiencing at least some of the pain that he himself felt. Ashley stood to the side, crying and trying to scream, begging them to stop. But her words were drowned in the roar of rage and pain that Chris was engulfed in. Tom tried to fight back, rose to his feet and struck back, but his movements were uncertain and his blows weak. Chris, a former champion, felt the fighter's instinct that had never completely disappeared again awakening in him. He hit accurately and strongly, putting all his despair, all his pain, all his rage into each blow. Finally, Tom collapsed on the floor, breathing heavily and looking at Chris with eyes full of hatred and fear. "You deserve it," Chris breathed, breathing heavily. "I trusted you. You were like a brother to me, and you did this." Chris turned his gaze to Ashley, who stood in the corner of the ring, frozen in fear and shock, tears streaming down her cheeks. "Why?" he asked her quietly, looking straight into her eyes. "What did I do wrong? What made you do this?" Ashley couldn't answer. She just cried quietly, trying to turn away. Chris turned away from them both, feeling the rage gradually drain away, leaving behind only emptiness and pain. He walked towards the door, pausing only for a second to say, "You both destroyed everything I had. I hope it was worth it." He walked out of the gym, leaving behind absolute silence and two people who destroyed everything he had ever believed in. Chris sat in his car, gripping the steering wheel tightly and looking ahead with an unseeing gaze. The cabin was dark, only the faint light of the street lamp cast shadows on his face, emphasizing the deep folds on his forehead and painfully compressed lips. He felt empty, as if someone had just ripped his heart out of his chest and left a void, filling it with burning pain and bitter questions. The scene he had just witnessed played over and over in his head. The picture of Ashley in Tom's arms seemed creepy and implausible to him, like a fragment of someone else's life that had cruelly and without warning burst into his reality. How could I not notice this? He wondered, which was painfully repeated in his head over and over again. When exactly did I become blind to what was happening to my wife? When exactly did I miss it? Chris remembered their first years of marriage, years filled with warmth and sincerity. They were happy, carefree, and it seemed that nothing could destroy their union. He remembered how Ashley always supported him, especially in the most difficult moments when he lost hope after his injury. Her voice, her look, her warmth, all this saved him, helped him find a new meaning in life. But somewhere along the way he missed her. How did this happen? He began to frantically go through all their moments together in his head, trying to find the very point where he made a mistake. Maybe this happened when he opened a gym and completely immersed himself in work, forgetting that he had a wife who also needed his attention, or when he entrusted her with too much responsibility, shifting all matters on to her, forgetting that she is, first of all, a woman who needs to feel loved and desired. Chris felt his heart clench with pain as he remembered how excited Ashley had been to tell him about Tom, how caring, attentive, and sincere he was. At the time, he considered it just friendly compliments and was even glad that they got along. But now these memories caused him unbearable pain. I gave them this opportunity myself, Chris thought bitterly, squeezing the steering wheel so hard that his knuckles turned white. He realized that it was his inattention, his blind faith in the ideality of their marriage that created the conditions for betrayal. He remembered every time she came to work with him, her smiles and glances, which he now saw in a completely different light. How could he be so naive, so blind, so confident in her fidelity? Chris felt humiliated and stupid, as if he had been betrayed by two of the people closest to him, right under his nose. What did I do wrong? He thought again and again, trying to find the answer. But there was no answer. He did everything he could, worked for their common future, tried to be a good husband, loved her more than anything in the world. But this, obviously, was not enough. His heart was torn with bitterness and pain mixed with anger and disgust. Now, thinking about his wife, he saw her completely differently, a woman capable of betrayal. He couldn't believe she was capable of this. How could she do this? How could she choose him, knowing how much it would hurt me? He wondered again and again, clenching his hands into fists. Chris didn't understand how Ashley could do this to him, how she could betray his trust, their common dreams and plans. He felt used, deceived, crushed, and helpless in the face of her betrayal. He raised his eyes to the dark sky, as if looking there for answers to questions that he was afraid to answer to himself. His thoughts were racing around in his head, giving no peace, leaving no hope for peace. At that moment, Chris, for the first time, called Ashley a word that he could not have uttered before, even in his thoughts: traitor. And this was the most painful confession for him. Sitting in the car in complete silence, he felt that he was now facing the most difficult decision of his life. The unknown lay before him, full of pain and doubt, but he knew that he would never be able to return to his old life, no matter how ideal it may have seemed before. Ashley returned home only in the morning, completely exhausted and depressed. She spent the entire night in the hospital next to Tom, helping him deal with the injuries inflicted by Chris. She still could not believe that everything happened in this way. The events of the night seemed like a terrible nightmare from which she could not wake up. As Ashley drove up to the house, she noticed Chris' car was parked in front of the house. My heart skipped a beat, gripped by fear and anticipation of the inevitable conversation. But upon entering the house, she felt a strange, frightening silence. "Chris," she called carefully, walking along the corridor and looking into the rooms. But there was no answer. Ashley went up to the bedroom and saw an empty, unmade bed. For a second, her heart sank painfully with anxiety. The thought flashed through my head that my husband had already found out about everything and left. She quickly went to the closet and saw that some of his clothes were missing. There was a neatly folded note on the table. Her heart was beating so hard that she had to take a deep breath to calm herself before picking up the paper. Work. I know everything. Now I understand that I was blind when I thought that everything was perfect with us. I won't make a scene or demand an explanation. You have chosen your path, and I am no longer a part of it. I'm leaving to give you the opportunity to be happy. I leave everything we had to you. House, money, property. I hope Tom makes you happier than I ever could. Chris. Ashley felt the floor beneath her feet begin to move away. The note fell from her trembling fingers, and she slowly sank to the floor, feeling tears begin to fill her eyes. There was complete confusion in her head. Pain, guilt, despair mixed into one unbearable feeling of loss and regret. She didn't expect Chris to find out about everything this way. She didn't expect that he would leave without saying anything, without causing a scandal, just quietly disappear, leaving her alone with the guilt and bitterness of her own betrayal. Ashley sat on the edge of the bed, remembering the past months. She thought about how she was gradually moving away from her husband, plunging into a new romance with Tom. Now, looking back, she realized how much she had hurt Chris, how cruelly she had treated the man who had always loved her, who had always been there, even when it seemed to her that he was too busy with his own affairs. Tears streamed down her cheeks, and she covered her face with her hands, trying to fight off the wave of shame and regret. She never wanted it to end this way. Yes, she was drawn to Tom. It seemed to her that with him she again felt alive and desired. But now she saw what a terrible mistake it turned out to be. Memories of her life together with Chris came flooding back to her, making her heart clench even more. She remembered their first meetings, tenderness and care, his eyes, always full of love and trust, and realized that she had destroyed something infinitely valuable and important. She spent several hours in the bedroom, staring at one point and trying to figure out what to do next. Deep down, she knew she had to find Chris, talk to him, try to explain, ask for forgiveness. But she also realized that she was unlikely to be able to earn forgiveness after what she had done. Ashley stood up and went to the phone, trying to dial Chris's number, but her hands were shaking so much that she couldn't hit the keys. In the end, abandoning this idea, she sat back on the sofa and stared blankly in front of her, realizing that she had lost her husband forever. She realized that now she had to live with this guilt and regret, with the consequences of her choice, which seemed to destroy everything she had. Ashley didn't know if she could ever forgive herself, but she was clear that her life would never be the same again. After a brutal night spent in the hospital next to Tom, Ashley was physically and mentally exhausted. Tom's condition worsened every day, and doctors did not give optimistic forecasts. Serious injuries inflicted by Chris led to irreparable consequences. Partial loss of vision, severe spinal damage, and constant pain became part of Tom's daily life. His coaching career was completely ruined and his future looked bleak and uncertain. Ashley was there, trying to ease his suffering, but every day Tom became colder and angrier towards her. At first, she attributed his irritability to physical pain, but she soon realized that the reason for his hatred was much deeper. One evening, sitting by his bed and trying to feed him dinner, Ashley felt that Tom's patience had reached its limit. "Go away," he suddenly said sharply, turning away from her. Ashley jumped in surprise. "Tom, please don't say that. I just want to help." "You've already helped enough," he snapped, turning sharply to her and looking at her with eyes full of bitterness and anger. His left eye, damaged during the fight, could barely see her silhouette. "It's because of you that I'm disabled now. You ruined my life." Ashley felt the blood drain from her face. "But I didn't want this," she whispered, feeling tears welling up in her eyes. "You got me into this." Tom raised his voice. "If it weren't for you and your stupid affair, I wouldn't have lost my job, my health, and my eyesight. Because of you, no one needs me now." Every word he said hurt her like a blow. She wanted to say something, to justify herself, to explain that she never thought that everything would end so tragically, but Tom no longer listened to her. "Get out of here, Ashley. Don't come back ever again. I don't need anything from you." His words sounded like a sentence. Ashley, feeling completely broken and empty, silently left the room, unable to even look at him again. Returning home, she realized that for the first time she was completely alone. Chris was no longer around, he left, leaving only a short note and endless emptiness. Now Tom has turned away from her, leaving her alone with her own guilt and despair. The following days turned into painful hours of loneliness and self-recrimination for her. She walked around the empty house, not finding a place for herself, constantly replaying all the events in her head, trying to understand how she could allow all this to happen. She was tormented by guilt for everything that had happened, for the broken marriage, for the fact that Chris left without saying anything, and for the state of Tom, whose life was now ruined. She constantly asked herself how she could have gotten to this point, why she didn't stop in time, why she didn't appreciate what she had. She tried to call Chris, but his number was disconnected. Ashley called his friends and relatives, but no one knew where he was. Chris seemed to disappear into thin air, disappearing from her life without a trace. Left alone, Ashley realized how much she depended on Chris. She was never alone, never knew what it was like to live without his support, love, and care. Now, deprived of all this, she felt completely helpless and lost. Every day, her condition worsened. She stopped going out, avoided meeting friends, closing herself off from everyone and everything in her pain and despair. Even her family could not reach her. Ashley refused to see anyone, locked in her house, as if in prison. One day, sitting in the dimness of the living room and looking at the photographs on the wall, she finally realized how deeply mistaken she had been in believing that she could build happiness on lies and betrayal. She remembered the tenderness and love in Chris's eyes, which she had seen every day for many years, and realized how cruelly and unfairly she had treated the man who had always loved her. Ashley realized that her life was now divided into before and after. Until this moment, she lived in a happy illusion, and now she is faced with a harsh reality. Her life would never be the same again, and the only thing she could do was look for a way to move on, although she had absolutely no idea how this was possible. Months have passed since the day when Ashley's life changed beyond recognition. She became just a shadow of the woman she once was. Without Chris by her side, and after a brutal breakup with Tom, Ashley felt lost and empty. She spent most of her time at home, avoiding communication with people and trying not to remember the past. One day, accidentally finding herself in a small cafe not far from the gym, Ashley overheard a conversation between two young guys who were excitedly discussing the upcoming underground fight. She sat at the table, quietly sipping her coffee, not showing much interest, until she heard a familiar name. "They say this guy is just a monster." "Nobody saw his face. He always fights in a mask," one of the guys said excitedly. "Yes, I heard that he has never lost before." "They call him the Shadow because he never shows his face," answered the second, gesticulating enthusiastically. Ashley froze, her heart suddenly beating faster. She didn't understand why, but the words of these strangers gave her an uneasy and strange feeling. Could it be him? But he has an injury. He can't risk his health like that, she thought, surprised at her thoughts. She involuntarily listened more carefully, trying to catch every word of their conversation. But no one even knows his real name. "He just comes, fights, wins, and leaves without saying a word," one of the interlocutors continued. Ashley felt a chill run down her spine. She remembered how Chris always said that in the ring, the main thing for him was the fight, and only him. And although Chris retired from professional boxing, his passion for fighting never disappeared. From that day on, Ashley could not get rid of the thought of the mysterious fighter. She began to be more interested in him, quietly collecting information herself. The more she learned, the more she was overcome by a strange feeling that this fighter could be Chris. She learned that the fights were taking place in an underground club on the outskirts of the city, in an old abandoned building, where those who wanted to see brutal and uncompromising fights gathered. The fighters who performed there were not professionals, they were people desperate, looking for adrenaline or simply trying to drown out their inner demons. One day, unable to withstand curiosity and inner anxiety, Ashley decided to go to one of these fights herself. She put on dark clothes and a hood, hiding her face, and quietly made her way into the hall, where a noisy crowd was already gathering. The atmosphere in the room was stuffy and tense. In the center was a makeshift ring, surrounded by spectators who shouted bets and demanded spectacle. Ashley got lost in the crowd, feeling uncomfortable and strange, but the desire to see the mysterious fighter was stronger than fear and doubt. Finally, the crowd erupted in applause, welcoming the masked fighter's appearance. He walked slowly and confidently, his eyes glued to the ring, as if there was no one around. Ashley's heart began to beat wildly when she saw his figure, the familiar posture, gait, every movement. The fighter stopped for a moment, as if sensing her gaze, but did not turn his head. He climbed into the ring, silently and calmly waiting for his opponent. His eyes, hidden behind the mask, seemed to see something that no one else could see. Ashley couldn't look away, couldn't breathe, couldn't think about anything other than the fact that Chris might be standing in front of her, the man she'd lost, betrayed, and was now painfully worried about. When the battle began, she was overcome with horror. This man fought with incredible cruelty and composure, as if there was nothing human in his actions. But at the same time, Ashley felt that it was this cruelty that he directed inside himself, as if he was trying to punish himself for something terrible and unbearable. Ashley was sure it was Chris. His movements, his style, his rage, all this told her that the man who was now brutally dealing with his rival was him. The battle ended quickly and mercilessly. The masked fighter, without even looking at his defeated opponent, left the ring, disappearing into the shadows. Ashley stood among the screaming and excited crowd, feeling tears streaming down her face. She realized that she was the reason that Chris was here, in this dark place, deprived of everything that was once dear to him. Now she had to figure out if she would ever be able to undo what she had done, or if she would only have to watch painfully as the man she once loved more than life itself slowly destroyed himself. Since her first visit to the underground club, Ashley couldn't stop thinking about the masked fighter she saw. Every day she was tormented by the thought that it could be Chris, risking his health, perhaps even his life, in these dangerous battles. The thought that he was deliberately putting himself in danger tormented her every night. A few weeks later, Ashley heard another rumor that the mystery fighter would be back in the ring. Without a moment's hesitation, she decided to go there again, desperately hoping to see him again and be sure that it was Chris. The hall was crowded, the atmosphere thick and tense. Ashley hid in the very corner, cowering into a small ball of anxiety and fear. She could not get rid of the painful feeling of guilt, the understanding that it was she who brought Chris to such a life. The announcer's voice cut through the hall loudly, drowning out the noise of the crowd. And now, ladies and gentlemen, a fighter whose name we don't know, but whose victories we all remember well. A fighter who never takes off his mask and never loses. Ashley felt her heart almost jump out of her chest when the mysterious fighter entered the ring. His posture, movements, and strength, it all seemed so familiar. She knew, felt, that it was Chris, and her fear for him was mixed with the bitter joy that she had finally seen him again. The masked fighter's opponent looked powerful and confident, but Ashley saw how calmly and even coldly he was waiting for the fight to begin, as if the outcome was already known to him in advance. The gong sounded sharp and deafening. The masked fighter rushed forward with incredible speed and strength, delivering a crushing blow almost instantly. His opponent collapsed to the floor without even having time to defend himself. The crowd roared with delight, amazed at the speed and power of this man. Ashley couldn't take her eyes off the winner, feeling her heart pounding. Her fears and suspicions were confirmed with every moment, with every movement, with every breath. And suddenly, to her horror and amazement, the fighter slowly raised his hands to his head and took off his mask. The crowd froze and then burst into cheers and applause again, but Ashley didn't hear anything anymore. Her eyes were drawn to the face of the man she knew so well, the face she loved and wanted so desperately to see again. It was Chris. Their eyes met and time stood still. In his gaze, she saw pain, anger, disappointment, and something else, something deep and incurable. Ashley froze in place, unable to breathe, feeling tears begin to burn her eyes. Chris looked straight at her, as if he could see right through her, and in his eyes there was a silent question. Why? Ashley wanted to scream, beg for forgiveness, explain, but the words stuck in her throat, leaving her standing there completely helpless. He looked away, slowly put his mask back on, and calmly walked out of the ring, disappearing into the darkness. Ashley felt her legs give way, and she had to lean on the wall to keep from falling. Now she knew for sure that it was Chris, the man she had betrayed, lost, and desperately wanted back, even though she knew it might already be too late. Ashley stood in the noise and chaos of the crowd, feeling only an endless emptiness and a deep regret that was impossible to escape. Ashley sat alone in the kitchen of her home, staring blankly into a mug of cold coffee. Memories flashed through her head, painful and beautiful at the same time, popping up before her eyes like frames from an old film. Her thoughts went back to the times when she first met Chris, when life seemed simple and happy. She remembered the night she first saw him in the bar, his confident smile and penetrating gaze. How easily and freely they talked about everything, as if they had known each other all their lives. Chris then seemed to her invulnerable, strong, and so attractive. He was the person with whom she felt safe, who instilled confidence and calm in her. Their romance was stormy and passionate, filled with sincerity and tenderness. Every day with him was an adventure, and every night a passionate discovery of each other. Ashley remembered how he gently hugged her, whispered words of love in her ear, and promised that he would always be there, no matter what happened. Then she believed him, believed in them. When Chris was injured, Ashley was his rock. She remembered how she spent days sitting next to his hospital bed, holding his hand, trying to instill hope in him. She did this not out of pity, but out of deep love and respect, knowing how strong and talented he was. She remembered how they opened a gym together, how they rejoiced at their first successes and struggled with difficulties that seemed insignificant while they were together. She saw the pride in his eyes when he trained students and heard the inspiration in his voice when he talked about his plans and dreams. But somewhere along the way they lost each other. Ashley couldn't remember the exact moment it happened. Perhaps it was when she first felt that she was missing his attention, or when she first smiled at Tom's compliment, feeling beautiful and desired again. Now, sitting in the silence of an empty house, she clearly realized that she herself had destroyed the beautiful thing that they had. She betrayed the man who always believed in her, who made her happy. Now she realized how expensive and rare what they had was. She remembered Chris's face after the fight she had seen recently, his eyes full of pain, rage, and disappointment. These were the eyes of a completely different person, one whom she did not recognize, the one who he became because of her. Ashley felt her heart clench with pain and guilt. She thought about how much she had changed Chris's life, making him such a cruel and bitter person, capable of hurting others without an iota of remorse. The man she loved and to whom she owed everything became a stranger, cold, unattainable. Ashley closed her eyes, trying to hold back the tears that began to well up again. She felt guilty that Chris had become like this, that his life had taken this cruel path. She wondered if she had a chance to change things, to bring back at least some of the man he used to be. I did it myself, she thought with bitter pain. I destroyed both of us. She knew she couldn't go back and change the past. The only thing she could do was try to find Chris, talk to him, explain and ask for forgiveness, even if she understood that she did not deserve it. But the fear of seeing coldness and contempt in his eyes again haunted her. Deep down, Ashley hoped that Chris would still be able to forgive her. And although she understood that it might already be too late, she still wanted to find him, see him again, hear his voice, even if full of anger and resentment. Ashley stood up, deciding she couldn't sit still any longer. She had to meet him, look him in the eyes, and try to undo at least part of what she had done. But deep in her heart, she was afraid that it might already be too late, and that the man she had once loved so much would forever remain lost and unavailable to her, cold and cruel, a completely different person from whom she herself had made him. Ashley stood near the back exit of the underground club, clasping her hands tensely, waiting for Chris to appear. Her heart beat desperately, her breath caught in fear and anxiety. She knew that this might be her only chance to reach him, to explain, to ask for forgiveness, and most importantly, to stop him before he hurt himself even more. Finally, the door opened and Chris emerged from the darkness, slowly and confidently walking towards her. His face was cold and impenetrable, his eyes looked forward, as if he did not see anything around him. He almost walked past her, but she, gathering all her strength, stepped forward, standing right in front of him. "Chris, please listen to me." Her voice trembled with excitement and despair. "You can't fight anymore. You had a serious head injury. If you keep getting in the ring, you could die." He stopped only for a moment, looking straight ahead, as if her words were just empty noise. His eyes were cold and empty, devoid of the warmth and love that she once saw in them. Ashley felt a rush of panic as she realized that this man was no longer the one she knew. "Please," her voice broke into a scream, and tears streamed down her cheeks. "For the sake of everything we had, don't do this. I beg you, stop." Chris slowly raised his eyes and met her gaze. For a second, it seemed to her that he was going to say something, but he was silent, and in his eyes she saw only emptiness and coldness. Then, without a word, he walked around her and continued on his way, as if she were just a shadow, a ghost of a past he did not want to acknowledge. Ashley felt her heart completely breaking. She stood paralyzed by pain and despair, feeling invisible and unwanted. Everything she believed in and hoped for was destroyed at that moment. She watched Chris leave, knowing that she had just lost him forever. Now he has become a stranger to her, whom she can never return. And this realization was worse than death for her. Ashley slowly sank to the cold ground, choking on tears and realizing that this was retribution for her mistakes, and now she would have to live with this for the rest of her days. Ashley was returning to an empty house, which now seemed alien and cold to her, as if the walls themselves were rejecting her presence. Every step along the dark corridor echoed with a painful echo of loneliness and despair. She slowly took off her coat and threw it on the sofa, falling helplessly next to him. The silence was so oppressive that it seemed like it was about to strangle her. Tears have long ceased to bring relief, turning only into a meaningless, tedious routine. Every evening Ashley sat alone, immersed in painful memories of the past. She understood that she had lost Chris forever. He will not forgive her, he will not return, and the realization of this was unbearable. Every day the feeling of guilt grew in her, absorbing all her thoughts and desires. Ashley stopped communicating with friends and family, avoided leaving the house, turning her life into voluntary confinement. The house, once filled with happiness and love, now turned into a real prison for her, the walls of which reminded her of her betrayal and the pain she caused. Despite all the pain and despair, she continued to go to underground fights where Chris performed. Each time, she stood in the far corner of the hall, clenching her fists and silently praying that he would remain alive and not be seriously injured. Every blow he gave or took felt pain in her heart, as if she were the one in the ring. After each fight, Ashley tried to talk to him again, hoping that at least once he would hear her, at least once stop and understand that his life was more important than the anger and pain that he held inside himself. But every time Chris walked past her as coldly and indifferently as if she did not exist. Every attempt to get closer to him, every ignoring, crushed her even more, making her realize that the Chris she once loved was gone forever. In his place was another man, tough and unapproachable, whom she could no longer recognize. Ashley returned home after each fight even more broken than before, but could not bring herself to stop going there. It was the only connection to the past, the only way to be close to the man she still desperately loved despite everything that had happened. One night, sitting in the cold living room and looking into the darkness, she finally realized that her struggle was futile. Chris will never come back, will never forgive her. She had lost him forever, and now she could only live with this painful realization. The house seemed to her more and more gloomy and empty, and life devoid of meaning. Ashley knew that the punishment she received for her betrayal was cruel, but deserved. and now all she could do was accept him and try to find a way to move on, although she had no idea how this was possible. Ashley tried again and again to force herself to start a new life, but each time she failed. She tried to change her environment, get a different job, and even thought about moving to another city in order to get rid of painful memories. But wherever she went, whatever she did, the shadows of the past invariably haunted her. Every day began with the thought of Chris and ended with the memory of how she treated the man who loved her more than life itself. Her heart was constantly tormented by unbearable pain, and it seemed that nothing could ease her suffering. One evening, sitting at the kitchen table and staring at the blank screen of her phone, Ashley felt an overwhelming urge to text him. Her fingers trembled over the keyboard, and she began to type a message, but immediately deleted it, realizing how useless it was. Chris had made it clear to her a long time ago that he wanted nothing to do with her. Ashley put the phone on the table, feeling the tears of despair welling up in her eyes again. She wondered if there were words in the world that could express what she felt, and at the same time she understood that no words could undo what she had done. She looked at the photographs that still hung on the walls, like reminders of her past happiness. Every picture showed their smiles, their eyes filled with love and hope for a future that will now never come. Ashley was painfully aware that she was the one who had destroyed everything good in her life. A thoughtless passion, a momentary weakness, ruined the only real and valuable thing she had: Chris's love. She spent every day alone, withdrawing deeper and deeper into herself, moving away from friends and family who tried in vain to help her cope with despair. But Ashley couldn't let herself forget, couldn't forgive herself for what she'd done. The nights were especially painful. She lay awake in the dark, replaying her last conversations with Chris in her head, remembering his eyes, full of pain and disappointment. These memories tormented her soul, depriving her of peace and sleep. She realized that she would never be able to turn back time and would never be able to correct her mistakes. This thought was heavy and merciless, like a sentence that she would have to bear for the rest of her days. Ashley understood that the only thing left for her was to come to terms with the consequences of her actions and continue to live with a heavy load of guilt and regret, trying to somehow drown out the pain of loss and loneliness. Chris never looked back. From the day he walked away, leaving his old life behind, he made the decision to no longer let the past control him. He didn't hold a grudge against Ashley, he simply erased her from his consciousness and from his life. There was no more pain, no more regrets, just an emptiness that he intended to fill with a new reality. Fighting became this new reality, cruel, merciless, having nothing to do with the discipline and respect that permeate professional rings. Now he did not fight for fame, money, or public recognition. He fought to free himself from the anger, rage, and disappointment that burned in his soul with a fire that he could not extinguish otherwise. Each fight was for him not just a fight with another opponent, it was a fight with himself, with that part of his soul that still remembered the betrayal and pain of loss. Every blow given or received was a punishment and liberation for him at the same time. He learned to love this pain because it was the only way he could forget about everything else. Over time, Chris became a legend among participants in underground battles. His cruelty became legendary, and his cold indifference to his opponents caused fear in even the most fearless fighters. But he didn't care about fame or respect, he just wanted to forget, and fighting gave him exactly that. Chris didn't talk to anyone, didn't make friends, didn't share his thoughts. He completely cut himself off from the outside world, creating an impenetrable wall around himself that no one could penetrate. Even thoughts about Ashley stopped causing him pain, gradually erasing, dissolving in the blood and sweat of the next battle. Sometimes he caught himself not even remembering her face, her voice. She disappeared from his life as suddenly as she had appeared, and now he considered her just a part of the past, a mistake that he had made and for which he was paying. But as night fell and Chris was left alone with himself, his thoughts returned to the day he first saw Ashley. Then he felt happiness, real, pure, and bright, which he had never experienced again. These memories sometimes broke through the anger and indifference that he cultivated within himself, and then he again entered the ring to get rid of them. For Chris, there was no future, no past. There was only the present, cruel and merciless, filled with pain, sweat, and blood. And he didn't want it to be any other way. It was his choice, his punishment, his new life, and he accepted it completely and without regret. Fighting became his only reality, the only way to exist, the only meaning for which he continued to wake up every morning. And while he felt the pain from the blows, while the blood flowed down his face, he knew that he was still alive, that he was still able to feel something other than the emptiness that filled his soul. Ashley stood at the entrance to the underground club, feeling her heart skip a beat with the heavy awareness of the upcoming moment. Today, she came here for the last time to see Chris fight and finally say goodbye to the past. A week ago, she received a job offer in another city, and now she wanted to leave behind forever everything that reminded her of pain and loss. The hall, as usual, was crowded with people thirsty for spectacle and blood. Ashley walked through the crowd and took her usual place in a dark corner, trying not to attract attention. Her gaze immediately found the familiar figure of Chris, who stood in the ring, intently warming up before the fight. Her heart sank painfully as she looked at him. He seemed completely alien to her, cold and unattainable, but at the same time she still saw in him the person whom she had once loved madly. The battle has begun. Chris's opponent was young, strong, and determined, but Chris moved confidently and quickly, demonstrating his superiority from the very first seconds. Ashley watched him throw blows, how he maneuvered skillfully and brutally, feeling fear for him overcome her. But suddenly something went wrong. His opponent, taking advantage of a moment's delay, delivered a powerful and accurate blow directly to Chris's head. Ashley felt the world around her slow down and her heart stop. Chris staggered, fell into the ring, and never got up again. The hall instantly fell silent, shocked. Ashley rushed forward, pushing people aside and desperately screaming his name. But it was too late. Chris lay on the floor motionless, and his eyes looked into emptiness, no longer seeing anything. Ashley fell to her knees next to him, grabbing his hand and trying to see at least some movement, even faint breathing. But his body was already lifeless. "Chris," she screamed, trying to bring him to consciousness, although she already understood that it was all over. She felt something inside her break forever. This was her most terrible punishment, final and irrevocable. The man she had betrayed, whom she had lost, was now gone forever, leaving her alone in a world where there was no longer any point in living. Ashley remained in the ring, holding his lifeless hand tightly and crying, knowing that this was their last goodbye moment. Now she was forever left alone with a feeling of guilt, ruined, broken, and abandoned. Her punishment was cruel and fair to live with the knowledge that she had destroyed everything good in her life and forever lost the one she loved more than life itself. Subscribe to our channel so that your love doesn't cheat on you, and go ahead and listen to the next story, because this story is nothing compared to the next one. If you're under 18, don't even think click to the next one.